And let's turn now to the other stories that we're following for you today. While the American warships were sailing towards North Korea, Washington dropped its biggest non-nuclear bomb in Afghanistan in a vivid display of U.S. military might. President Trump praised the bombing, but wouldn't be drawn on whether it had any strategic connection to the U.S. Navy deployment off North Korea's shores.
Does it send a message to North Korea?
I don't know if this sends a message. It doesn't make any difference if it does or not.
The so-called mother of all bombs is as tall as a three-story building. It has a colossal weight and reaps destruction over a 1.5-kilometer area. And unlike Donald Trump, one former CIA officer sees a clear connection between the Afghan strike and the increased U.S. military presence in the Asia-Pacific region.
Everything is connected. They drop this now. They know the North Koreans are watching. They know that the Syrians are watching. Yes, they know that the Russians are watching. This is an issue that they're doing for effect, and I don't think that can be discounted.
With all this going on, Google says searches of the term World War III have skyrocketed. We asked people around the globe if they really believe conflict is just around the corner.
Because Trump bombed Syria, and people are afraid of what's going to happen next.
Terrorism, there's bombs, there's crazy things going on.
There's a general sense of alarm in the culture, which has been building for a long time.
No, we're not safe, not with Trump around.
I think there's a certain whipping up of tension. I don't know what it's connected to, but people know about it, and of course they're afraid.
Koreans, Russians, Americans and us.
Korea and China.
Syria.
I think Russia, China, the other BRICS countries, Syria, Iran, and probably Iraq will fight against the West, US, France, Great Britain, and some of their allies from the Gulf countries.
It seems people do not learn from history. Nuclear weapons would mean the whole planet would suffer.
You've got the new President Trump very eager to go to war.
And while people worried about the possible consequences of Donald Trump's actions, the president recalled the exact moment he first shared his decision to launch missiles, though he momentarily muddled up which country he had ordered the military to target.
We had the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen, and President Xi was enjoying it. So what happens is, I said, we've just launched 59 missiles heading to Iraq.
Well, you headed to Syria?
Yes, heading toward Syria.
But things weren't as sweet this week at the UN Security Council when Russia vetoed a draft UN resolution initiated by the US, UK, and France regarding a probe into the alleged chemical attack in Syria. Moscow's representative says the resolution would have apportioned blame before a proper investigation had been held.
The strike on the Syrian airbase undertaken before an international investigation had been conducted is in violation of international law and unsanctioned by the Security Council. Acceptance of the draft resolution would have meant the legitimization of the strike, and this, from the point of view of international law and common sense, is unacceptable.
Russian pride in the Astana process has been turned to humiliation, and Russia's credibility and reputation across the world have been poisoned by its toxic association with Assad. They have chosen to side with a murderous, barbaric criminal rather than with their international peers. They have chosen the wrong side of history.
Выступление представителя Великобритании.
UK Representative Rycroft's speech has shown the only thing he thinks of is to bring confrontation and hostility to the Security Council. And the reason for this, and many at the UN know about it, is that you're scared. You lost sleep because we could work together with the US. That's what you're afraid of. You do everything you can to undermine such cooperation. Look at me. Don't look away. So it turns out that regime change in Syria is more important to you.
And the UN Security Council is not the only place where Britain has been expressing its anger towards Russia over Syria. At the G7 summit also held this week, Britain's foreign secretary was pushing for a new set of tough sanctions against the Kremlin. However, he failed to get the support of the other members. All eyes then moved to the first visit to Russia of the new U.S. Secretary of State and whether he'd travel there with his ultimatum, quote, "It's us or them." Our Ilya Petrenko looks back at Rex Tillerson's day in Moscow.
It's exactly 11 o'clock, the scheduled arrival of Mr. Tillerson, and it looks like a record-breaking crowd of journalists in this room.
Mr. Secretary's late, but just by a couple of minutes. Cameras are pointing at the flags, but Rex Tillerson and Sergei Lavrov won't come for another 20 minutes. At this point in the room, only Ambassador Teft knows what's been going on behind closed doors. At last, the diplomats sit down, and one U.S. reporter just decides everyone's a guest on her own show. What a telling off she gets then.
How confident are you, Mr. Secretary?
Who was briefing you up? Who was giving you your messages?
Another few minutes, and the massive journalist pack are kicked out of the room.
The doors are now closed, so let's count how long the meeting will take.
In a bit more than 2 hours. Enough talking in this room. Time for more here with food. On the menu today, dock leaf soup, crispy fried smelt fish, and apple pie. Something that looks like this. Chewing over what will happen with our world tomorrow.
Somewhere behind this window. Now, this is the porch where former Secretary of State John Kerry or Sergei Lavrov used to come out to have a smoke or maybe make a phone call, but so far we haven't seen anyone.
From then on, a blackout for journalists. No one's allowed anywhere. The only time I see Rex Tillerson's face, or part of it actually, is when his motorcade drives off at 2:47 p.m. And he goes to, you won't believe it, the Ritz-Carlton. That very same hotel where Donald Trump was accused of, doing those dirty deeds. Reporters are left to wait in a room that just can't fit us all. 5:30, someone gives a heads up. The white Chevrolets have left the Ritz. Mr. Tillerson is heading to the Kremlin. 2 hours of conversation with Vladimir Putin in mega secrecy. Not only do we not get any footage, in fact, we don't get a single photo of the two together. So what? Are we to hear about any breakthroughs at the presser? 8:33, the long-awaited press event begins. Here are my highlights.
We discussed no change in the status of sanctions.
The U.S. Secretary of State has not threatened us with sanctions. Actually, he has not threatened us with anything at all.
There is a low level of trust between our two countries. We need to attempt to put an end to this steady degradation, which is doing nothing to restore the trust between our two countries or to make progress on the issues of the greatest importance to both of us.
Russia remains open to dialogue between countries in various range of spheres, and we're dedicated not only to said dialogue, but to our joint actions as well.
Is that it? No ultimatums or sanctions thrown at Moscow? Or otherwise, no dancing to Putin's tune by Trump's pick for the State Department top job?
New U.S. Secretary of State, 5 hours of talks with Lavrov, 2 with Putin, and then 60 minutes of talking to the press. But really, anything substantially new when it comes to how the U.S. gets along with Russia? We understand that we got to improve our relations, but still, there are many, many differences, and Assad will have to go.
This week, the UK tried to get the G7 to gang up on Russia. It failed to convince member countries to impose fresh sanctions on the Kremlin, though that didn't make UK Foreign Secretary to give up. Boris Johnson next wrote an article in Britain's The Telegraph newspaper blaming Assad for the chemical incident in Syria. Despite his emotional language, he presented little evidence, as Paula Sleer now explains.
Johnson talks about horrific evidence that leads him to conclude that the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad carried out that attack, but he doesn't give any kind of substantiation as to what that horrific evidence is. There is talk about some photographs and some eyewitness accounts, but the question as to how verified these accounts are remains unanswered. This whole mountain of accusations that the Foreign Secretary has leads him to say, and I'm quoting now, "We believe that it is highly likely that this attack was carried out by Assad." Despite the lack of evidence, this doesn't stop Johnson from pointing fingers at the Syrian president and also from accusing media outlets like RT from lying. He talks about us and he says, and again I'm quoting, that we are a dark fountain of propaganda without giving any kind of explanation as to why he says this. Now, the only concrete facts that there are, if you can call it that, is an investigation that was carried out by British scientists.
British scientists have analyzed samples from the victims of the attack.
Several days ago, OPCW experts announced that they'd secretly taken samples at the site of the incident and had taken them to a lab, which is, as I understand, not certified by the OPCW. It's hard to understand why such clumsy actions were taken.
Now, all of this we already saw in a joint article by Boris Johnson and his French counterpart in an article in The Guardian. Only at the end of the article is there a mention that the investigation into this attack is still ongoing.
And the American city of Berkeley witnesses chaotic scenes once again as Trump supporters and opponents clash during rallies.